Kia ora te whānau a iho karaiti ko and double day. It's Good Friday. And today we're considering part of the gospel leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus. The gospel text for today is actually John 18 verse 1 through to John 19 verse 42, which covers 82 verses. It's a very long reading. For the purposes of this message, I've looked at John 18 and 28 through to 19 and verse 16, which is only 28 verses. And it really concerns the part played in the whole drama by Pilate. Pilate was governor of Judea and Jerusalem for 10 years. Now, I grew up believing that Pilate was a brutal monster. He was pure evil. I was taught that. And clearly responsible for the execution of Jesus. Yet I've spent some time with the whole of the Pilate narratives as we find it in the New Testament. And some time in a little bit of the more secular history. And it's true that Pilate had a part to play. Yet I've come out of the whole thing with some real sympathy for him. And I kind of feel sure that Jesus would also. Pilate died at his own hand not long after the events recounted in the story. He'd been recalled to Rome. There was an inquiry into one of his previous decisions, and it didn't go well for him. The emperor who had sponsored him, Tiberius, and who stood behind him, was gone. And by the time he reached Rome, Caligula was in power. To use modern colloquialisms, it seems that he was hung out to dry or thrown under the bus or perhaps under the chariot. So as one reads the narratives, there comes a point when Pilate can no longer resist the pressure from the religious leaders. His own future is called into question. As it is, it probably made a little difference. But there was a sensitivity at this point. There is some evidence that Pilate became a follower of Jesus. It certainly appears that his wife did. The Coptic, which is the Egyptian Orthodox Church, even canonized Pilate. They made him a saint. The religious leaders in our story here, though in our narrative, have found the pressure point in his life, that part where they can squeeze, knowing that there's going to be a reaction and a response. And it's found in these words: "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself up against the emperor." Now, Pilate already knew that he was in trouble, and that another complaint, particularly one that came with this kind of wording, could finish him. So he's confronted with Jesus. He ultimately, it would appear, makes a decision based on his own self-interest, rather than necessarily doing the right thing, though I believe his ultimate decision was more nuanced than that. I wondered how much this subsequently tortured Pilate. I wonder if he felt remorse and felt that he deserved his final fate. I wondered whether taking his own life was for him a form of penance. Because when he hands Jesus over, he really has nowhere else to go. He really has no other options left to him. I've wondered about the flogging, having Jesus scourged, in the words of the King James Version, I think. And I've wondered whether this seeming act of brutality was actually intended as a mercy, as a kind of peculiar act of kindness. Lead-tipped whips were used, and they would tear at the skin. And they would often expose the internal organs. And many people died simply from the scourging. And if the scourging itself didn't kill Jesus, which apparently it didn't, the crucifixion may not have come as such a shock, and it would almost certainly have shortened his suffering. Am I trying to make a saint out of Pilate? No, I'm trying to understand him. I'm trying to put myself in his shoes. It's clear from all the gospel narratives that he wanted desperately to set Jesus free. And Jesus didn't help. If anything, Jesus simply made it easier for Pilate to hand him over. Yet here he is, as he presents Jesus, complete with a purple robe and a crown of thorns. Behold the man. My sense is that the statement is actually grounded in a deep respect. It would be easy to think it's mockery. I don't believe that to be the case. Pilate is really saying something. And if there is mockery, it's of those who wanted Jesus' blood. While he ultimately accedes to their demands, after all, what choice did he really have? If he hadn't, there would almost certainly have been a riot. Much blood could have been spilt, and many more could have died. And it would have been the basis of more complaints against him. And yet, to the end, Pilate affirms Jesus' innocence. And he really annoys the religious leaders by having an inscription put on the cross, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And he has it written in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. There's no excuses for people coming by to not know what it said. I want to suggest it's a statement of faith. And he refused to change it. It didn't matter what pressure was brought to bear by the religious leaders. It stood as it was. In his final encounter with Jesus, Pilate says, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you?" He claims that Jesus' life is in his hands, whether he wants it to be so or not. There's a sense that he's saying to Jesus, give me something I can work with, something that I can use. Work with me on this. I don't want to have you strung up. Help me here. And Jesus responds, you have no power over me unless it's been given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. It's as if to say, you're actually a small cog in this machine. It's those who handed me over to you that are more culpable. It's that crowd outside baying for my blood, and they're not going to be content until they get it. And perhaps best let them have their way. It'll be much uglier if you don't. So here's Pilate, caught between doing the right thing and the pragmatic thing. Caught between a rock and a hard place. Caught not necessarily choosing between the good and the bad, but caught trying to choose between two bads. Pilate is you and me. He's Peter and the other 10 disciples who would never deny Jesus until they did. He's Judas who betrayed Jesus, perhaps in a misguided effort to force Jesus to be the kind of militaristic Messiah that he wanted, rather than the self-sacrificial kind of Messiah that he actually was. Pilate represents both the best and the worst in us, the courage and the cowardice, one who held out as long as he could, yet found a limit where his own need for self-preservation transcended his need to stand for truth and to protect the innocent. Yet he doesn't stand condemned. And maybe as a result of this found a pathway to redemption, discovered that even his handing over of Jesus was forgivable, that Jesus reaches towards him as he journeys to the cross. The cross is Jesus' answer to the messed up, conflicted and evil choices we all make. It's the pathway to health, healing, new beginnings for all the Pilates among us. It's for every one of us who fails, who makes the less than ideal choices, who struggles to be the best version of ourselves and fails. It's at the cross that forgiveness is offered and that redemption is ultimately found. It's at the cross that the love of God is expressed in Jesus and allows each and every one of us a new beginning. Amen.